Well, for more analysis on Paris's intelligence and security, let's go to Christian Leurprecht. His research focuses on national security and defence policy. Mr. Leuprecht, thank you very much for joining us. Is there any way, do you think, that the security services could have tried to combat this kind of coordinated attack?
Well, I think this is the operative question to ask. France has a very effective, long experienced security service with terrorism, really dating back to the 1960s. They have a very effective intelligence service and relatively permissive laws compared to other democracies in terms of the remit of these security services, also into people's private lives. And so it suggests if this sort of attack can fly under the radar, or perhaps some difficult resource allocation decisions were made, and so as a result not enough attention was paid, it means that this attack could happen anywhere. And so it means that security services can only combat symptoms, are constantly stretched thin, and are always working on this fine silver line between if they go too far, then they'll be critiqued by the public and by their governments, and if they have a failure, then everybody will try to criticize them for why they didn't do more. And so we really need to get at the roots of these conflicts.
And President Hollande talked about the response of France being merciless. What form do you think that could take?
Well, I think the challenge here is that we're starting to see this discourse about war. This is a declaration of war, but really I think that just points to how limited we are with it in terms of our legal resources, that we've maxed out what we can do in terms of security services and the legal framework, the rule of law and modern state framework. And so the only response that people's leaders feel they have is sort of to call this a declaration of war. But I mean, ultimately, what's going to help here is we have to create conditions that make the areas that breed this type of violent ideology that promotes this type of extreme violent extremism, places that are economically, socially, culturally, and politically viable for all the individuals who inhabitate them. And so the challenge here is really trying to bring some stability back to Syria, to Iraq, and not have these become as breeding grounds, because we can combat ISIS. But even if we do in ISIS, it'll be just a whack-a-mole experience where just some other extremist group is going to pop up as long as these unsustainable political, economic, social conditions prevail.
And you talk about politico-economic conditions. What do the international community need to do, like physically, to get those things put in place? There seems to be some reticence to actually take the first step by member states.
Well, I think we saw yesterday also by John Kerry, for instance, in Vienna. I mean, the strategy here is trying to get the actors with whom we can actually negotiate to agree to some sort of a ceasefire on the ground, so that we can focus on the actors that are the real challenge, which is, of course, Daesh and some of the al-Nusra, al-Qaeda affiliates in the region. So the broader strategy, I think, has to be, in particular, getting the regional veto players, especially Iran and Saudi Arabia, which have really been and especially Saudi Arabia at the negotiations, the toughest nuts to crack, to get them on side and agree and find a way forward here, so that as the international community, we can bring some stability back to the region, and we can focus all our efforts on those entities that are now willing to export the same sort of cruel and inhumane treatment that they have shown to the territories which they occupy. They now seem to be willing to export to the rest of the world, whether that's the Metrojet bombing or whether that's the Paris attacks. And I think we all need to be worried, and we need to do as much as we can to curtail that capacity.
And how do you see this playing out in the coming months, Mr. Leuprecht? Do you think that the attacks in Paris could really galvanize the international community to do as much as they can in Syria and Iraq?
Yeah, I think it's tragic that it always takes the things such as the refugee crisis and the attacks in Paris to bring people together. But I think we're seeing already the aftermath of the attack, much greater cooperation on the military and the intelligence side, and a considerable movement forward in terms of the negotiations, in part because I think some of the previous veto players were concerned that they might be next in terms of the list of attacks by Daesh. And so I do think we'll see substantial movement in the coming months. But it's sort of a little bit too little, too late in terms of now having to live with the aftermath of this monster. And hopefully we can be more prescient with regards to other regions of the world, such as Northwest Africa, where these organizations are starting to take root, and where we need to make sure that they don't reach the sort of level of chaos and expanse that they have in Iraq and Syria.
Christian Leurprecht, thank you very much for that analysis.